Have you ever wondered about those forgotten down-home recipes that no one makes anymore? These dishes once filled homes with flavor, family stories, and a deep sense of identity every day. How much of our history are we losing by letting these meals fade away? Ham hocks and butter beans. If you ever walked into Grandma's kitchen and caught that smoky, savory scent wafting through the screen door, chances are she had ham hocks bubbling away in a pot with butter beans. Not lima beans, butter beans, the big creamy kind that melted on your tongue. She'd cook them slow with onions, black pepper, and just enough bacon grease to make your doctor nervous. The ham hock would sit there like royalty, all glistening and tender, lending its flavor like a southern patriarch at a family reunion. Quiet, but in charge. And don't even think about showing up without cornbread to mop up the juice. That'd get you a look. Cracklins. Cracklins weren't just a snack. They were a rite of passage, made from pork fat cut into little squares and fried until blistered and golden. They were crunchy, salty, and could crack a molar clean in half if you weren't careful. Grandma used to keep a brown paper sack of them on top of the fridge next to the jar of bacon grease and a stack of Blue Horse notebooks. They weren't for the faint of heart or weak of teeth. Some folks crumbled them into cornbread batter. Others ate them plain with a cold bottle of RC Cola. Either way, they were pure Southern gold. Tomato gravy. Tomato gravy was born of hard times and clever women. When the bacon drippings were too precious to waste, Grandma would toss in a spoonful of flour, stir in canned tomatoes, and season it like her life depended on it. She poured it over biscuits like it was Sunday sauce, and somehow it tasted better than anything from a jar. If you were lucky, she'd serve it with a slice of hoop cheese and a side eye for asking what was in it. No one wanted tomato gravy until they tasted it. Then you'd lick the plate and ask for seconds. Salmon patties. Canned salmon. Bones, eyes, and all. Grandma didn't flinch. She just mashed it up with saltines, egg, and chopped onion like it was filet mignon. She'd fry it in her favorite cast iron skillet until the outside got crisp and the kitchen smelled like Friday night. You might find a little vertebra in there if she was rushing, but you'd just fish it out and keep chewing. Served with ketchup or stewed tomatoes, salmon patties were humble but honest, kind of like Grandma herself. And Lord help the child who turned up their nose. You'd sit there till bedtime. Liver and onions. This was the dish you didn't ask for, but you sure got it. Usually on a Thursday, and always with a side of green beans that had been cooked since Tuesday. If Ma was feeling generous, it was calf's liver from the A&P. If not, you got beef liver, tough as boot leather and twice as chewy. She'd fry it in Crisco until it stopped wiggling, then smother it in onions sautéed to oblivion. You didn't have to like it, but you were sure going to eat it, or stare at it until the kitchen closed. And in that house, the kitchen did close. Fatback. Before bacon got all fancy with maple glazes and social media accounts, there was fatback. Pure, salty pork heaven. Grandma would fry a slab and slap it between 2 slices of white bread with a little yellow mustard. That was lunch. Or she'd toss a piece into a pot of greens, where it'd simmer like a secret weapon until the whole kitchen smelled like home. It wasn't trendy, it wasn't pretty, but it seasoned food the way life seasoned people, slowly and with a little bite. Okra and tomato stew. This dish was part meal, part side, and all Southern. Grandma grew the okra herself, long and green, and just the right kind of slimy. She'd stew it down with tomatoes, onions, maybe some corn if the garden was generous. It simmered on the back burner all afternoon, gently bubbling like it had nowhere to be. The okra got soft, the tomatoes broke down, and by supper, it was a spoonful of summer in every bite. You didn't serve it. You just handed over a bowl and a square of cornbread and let folks find their peace. Sorghum syrup. This wasn't pancake syrup. This was the thick, dark, sticky gold that came in a metal tin with a rusted lid and your cousin's fingerprints on the side. Grandma would spoon it over hot biscuits and tell you not to waste a drop. If you were real Southern, you'd use a pat of butter to carve a little crater in the biscuit, then fill it with syrup like a tiny volcano. Sweet, earthy, and rich enough to pull a baby tooth clean out. It was Southern nectar, plain and simple. Molasses bread. Molasses bread was born in the same kitchen as hand-me-down aprons and chipped Pyrex bowls. Grandma would whip it up when sugar was scarce, but something sweet was still expected. Dense, dark, and speckled with spice, it filled the house with a smell so warm it should have been bottled and sold at Woolworths. You'd slice it thick, smear it with butter, and sit on the porch pretending it wasn't just dessert disguised as bread. The crust had a little chew to it, and the middle was soft as a hymn. Black-eyed peas. You didn't have to wait for New Year's Day to see black-eyed peas on Grandma's stove. She made them all year long, usually with a ham bone and a prayer. They weren't flashy, but they were faithful. Always there when you needed something warm, filling, and vaguely healthy. She'd ladle them into a bowl, top them with chopped onions or a splash of hot sauce, and hand you a slice of skillet cornbread to soak up the pot liquor. And if you said you didn't like them, she'd just keep right on serving them till you did. Boiled peanuts. If you've never eaten peanuts from a soggy paper bag standing in the shade of a roadside stand, I hate to say it, but you might be doing life wrong. Grandma didn't wait for fairs or gas stations to get her fix. She'd simmer raw green peanuts in salted water for hours until they were soft, salty, and just this side of addictive. You popped them open with your teeth, juice and all, and tossed the shells into a coffee can. No napkin, no plate, just boiled peanuts and a breeze, maybe a pitcher of sweet tea if you were lucky. Buttered rutabagas. The name alone could strike fear into a child's heart. But Grandma didn't care if you liked rutabagas. You were going to eat them, and you were going to say thank you. Peeled, cubed, boiled to softness, and mashed with enough butter to make a dairy cow nervous. They were sweet, earthy, and surprisingly good if you didn't ask too many questions. She called them root vegetables, but we all knew that was code for whatever was cheap and filling at Piggly Wiggly. Sprinkle on some black pepper, and suddenly it wasn't so bad. Brunswick stew. Brunswick stew wasn't just a recipe, it was a community event. Somebody's uncle would drag out the cast iron kettle the size of a bathtub, and everybody from church would bring something to toss in. Shredded chicken, stewed tomatoes, corn, lima beans, and a mystery ingredient no one dared ask about. It bubbled all day over an open flame, while folks played horseshoes and swapped gossip. Grandma said real Brunswick stew should stand up on a spoon. None of that watery nonsense. You'd burn your tongue every time because you couldn't wait. Worth it. Chocolate biscuit pudding. Leave it to a Southern grandma to turn stale biscuits and a bit of cocoa into something that made your eyes roll back. Chocolate biscuit pudding wasn't written down. It was passed along by watching, by stirring, by knowing when the texture was just right. She'd crumble day-old biscuits into a baking dish, then pour over a warm mixture of cocoa, sugar, eggs, and pet milk until everything was swimming in sweet chocolate comfort. Sometimes she'd toss in a handful of raisins or chopped pecans if she had them. Baked low until thick and soft, it came out like a cross between bread pudding and fudge, but so good it never saw the inside of a Tupperware container. You didn't ask for it, but once you had it, you asked for it again. Humble cabbage. If there was one thing always in Grandma's fridge, it was a head of cabbage, and she could stretch it into a dozen meals. Boiled cabbage, fried cabbage, cabbage with bacon, cabbage with onions. Pick your mood. She'd slice it thin and sizzle it down in lard or bacon grease until it was sweet and tender, with crispy little brown edges that stuck to the pan. Smelled up the whole house in the best way. Served with cornbread and a glass of pet milk over ice. That was a Depression-era dinner that still slapped. Buttermilk pie. The name might not win any awards, but Grandma's buttermilk pie was the stuff of legends. Tangy, custardy, With just enough sugar to keep it from being mistaken for a side dish, it was poured into a flaky Crisco crust and baked until it had the slightest jiggle in the middle. She didn't write the recipe down, just knew it by heart and by feel. Served cold or room temp, it was better than lemon meringue or chess pie combined. You could always tell who the favorite was by who got the last slice. Canned mackerel loaf. If salmon patties were Friday night humble, canned mackerel loaf was Tuesday night desperate. Made with mackerel from the bottom shelf at A&P, eggs, crushed saltines, and maybe a dash of Worcestershire if someone was feeling wild, it was packed into a loaf pan and baked into a dense, salty miracle. Grandma would slice it thick and serve it with ketchup, coleslaw, or sometimes just plain white bread. It didn't look like much, and it smelled like even less, but it stuck to your ribs and filled the kitchen with a scent that said, "Supper's on." Fried chicken. This one didn't come from a bucket or carry-out box. Grandma's fried chicken was the real deal, soaked in buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour, maybe a little cornmeal if she was feeling old school, and fried in lard until it was crispy, golden, and slightly dangerous to touch. She didn't own a thermometer, just knew by the sound of the sizzle when it was ready. Served hot or cold, with a biscuit on the side, and grease on your fingers, it was worth every burn and every paper towel that tried to soak it up. Meat pie. Call it a hand pie, a meat turnover, or just that good thing wrapped in dough. Grandma knew what she was doing. She'd take ground beef or leftover roast, mix it with onions, maybe a little gravy, and seal it all in a homemade crust like a Southern Hot Pocket. Except instead of microwaving it, she baked it in a gas oven that was always a little crooked. Crisp on the edges, hot in the middle, and guaranteed to burn your tongue if you didn't wait. Which you didn't, because you never did. Chicken and dumplings. This dish didn't need explaining. If you grew up Southern, you knew it like you knew how to snap beans or butter a biscuit. Grandma boiled down a whole chicken until the broth was rich and golden, then dropped in soft, hand-rolled dumplings that puffed up like clouds. No shortcuts, no cans, just flour, love, and time. She served it in chipped bowls with a side of silence, because once you had that first bite, there wasn't much left to say. You didn't need a holiday, just a cold day, an empty stomach, and a grandma who knew her way around a rolling pin. Hoe cakes. Before there were store-bought pancake mixes or fancy brunch menus, there were hoe cakes, crispy-edged cornmeal flatbreads fried in a hot skillet and served with whatever you had on hand, butter, molasses, or a swipe of sorghum. Grandma said they got their name because field hands used to cook them on the back of a garden hoe over an open fire. Whether that's true or just something she said to get us to hush and eat, we'll never know. But one thing's for sure, they beat the britches off a frozen waffle any day. Peanut butter pie. Creamy, sweet, and just salty enough to make your eyes roll back. Peanut butter pie was Grandma's way of saying, "You did good, now here's your reward." She'd blend Jif peanut butter with cream cheese, powdered sugar, and a little vanilla, then fold it into a mountain of Cool Whip and pour the whole mess into a graham cracker crust. Some versions got a drizzle of Hershey's syrup, but Grandma said that was showing off. Cold, rich, and likely responsible for more than a few family scuffles over the last slice. Chicken livers and onions. This one separated the grandkids from the grown folks. Grandma fried her chicken livers in seasoned flour until golden, then tossed them with sautéed onions and a whisper of garlic. The smell alone could clear a room, or bring it together, depending on your upbringing. Served with mustard, hot sauce, or plain white bread, they were cheap, iron-rich, and surprisingly addictive if you gave them a fair shot. Just don't ask what part you're eating. Grandma would just say, "It's good for you," and hand you a fork. Cornbread salad. Leave it to Grandma to crumble up leftover cornbread and turn it into something that deserved a place at the church potluck. She'd layer it with chopped tomatoes, green onions, pinto beans, shredded cheddar, and a dollop of Duke's mayo mixed with ranch dressing mix. Cold, crunchy, creamy. It was Southern thrift at its finest. Some folks called it strange, others called it genius. Either way, it never made it past the first round of seconds. Cabbage rolls. This was one of those dishes that looked like Grandma had gone fancy, but really, it was just clever grocery stretching wrapped in boiled cabbage. She'd stuff each leaf with a mix of ground beef, rice, and tomato sauce, roll them up tight, and bake until everything was tender and bubbling like an old church potluck. You always started skeptical and ended up asking for seconds. Sometimes she'd add a pinch of brown sugar or Worcestershire for depth. But mostly, it was just good, warm, and made with hands that knew what hard work tasted like. Macaroni and tomatoes. Call it peasant food if you want, but don't call it bland. Macaroni and tomatoes was the meal Grandma made when payday was still a few days out and supper needed to stretch. She'd cook elbow noodles, pour over stewed tomatoes, and stir in a hunk of butter with a little salt and black pepper. If she was feeling wild, maybe a splash of milk or a crumble of bacon on top. It wasn't flashy, but it was hot, filling, and always showed up in a Carrel bowl next to a slice of white bread. Sometimes that's all you need. Wilted bacon salad. It sounded like a contradiction, but it sure didn't taste like one. Wilted bacon salad started with leaf lettuce, usually from someone's backyard garden, and hot bacon grease poured right over it. Add some chopped boiled egg, green onion, and a splash of vinegar, and you had yourself a side dish that slapped you in the face and kissed you right after. Grandma called it a warm salad. But let's be honest, this was lettuce in a bacon bath, and it was glorious. Squash casserole. Yellow squash, sweet onion, saltine cracker crumbs, and enough cheddar cheese to patch a heartbreak. That's what went into Grandma's squash casserole. She'd sauté the squash until soft, stir everything together with a generous spoonful of mayo or cream of chicken soup, and bake it until bubbly and golden. It was a permanent fixture at family reunions and always sat next to the green bean casserole, stealing the show every time. You didn't ask for the recipe because she never used one. Pigs in a blanket. Not the party kind with puff pastry and cocktail weenies. We're talking biscuit dough from scratch and full-sized hot dogs cut in half. Grandma would roll each dog into a buttery hunk of dough, brush it with a little milk, and bake it until golden and soft, like a hug in handheld form. Sometimes she'd sprinkle cheese on top or sneak a pickle slice inside just to keep things interesting. They were lunch, dinner, snack, whatever you needed them to be, and no one ever ate just one. Sweet potato pie. Before pumpkin spice took over the world, there was sweet potato pie, and Grandma's version didn't need no fancy latte to be the star of the show. She'd roast the sweet potatoes herself, mash them smooth, and mix in pet milk, a splash of vanilla, and a heavy hand with the nutmeg. It baked up like velvet in a pie shell, golden and soft, with just enough jiggle to keep things honest. She always said it wasn't dessert, unless it made you close your eyes and sigh, and that pie made you do both. Stuffed peppers. Stuffed peppers were Grandma's way of cleaning out the icebox and making it look intentional. She'd cut the tops off green bell peppers, hollow them out like little edible pots, and fill them with ground beef, leftover rice, diced tomatoes, and whatever seasoning her hand landed on first. Sometimes she topped them with a slice of American cheese, sometimes a spoonful of ketchup. Baked until the peppers slumped like they'd had a long day. They were savory, filling, and surprisingly good reheated, if any made it to leftovers. Southern skillet cornbread. This wasn't that sweet, cakey stuff you find up north. Southern cornbread had bite, had body, and had a crust sharp enough to qualify as a weapon. Grandma swore by white lily cornmeal and baked it in a cast-iron skillet so seasoned it had stories. No sugar, no flour, just cornmeal, buttermilk, egg, and bacon grease so hot it sizzled when she poured the batter in. The bottom came out crisp and golden, the top a little rugged, just like her. Break off a wedge, slather it in butter, and try not to eat the whole pan. Pimento cheese. Also known as Southern pâté, pimento cheese was a permanent resident in Grandma's fridge. Sharp cheddar, mayo, diced pimentos, and a little vinegar or hot sauce if she felt feisty. She kept it in a glass bowl with plastic wrap pulled tight and a spoon already in it. It went on saltines between slices of Wonder Bread or, if you were feeling uppity, stuffed in celery sticks. You could smell it before you saw it, and it never lasted long. Every family had their own recipe, and everyone else's was wrong. Fried green tomatoes. You knew they were in season when Grandma came home from the farmer's market with a brown paper sack of firm green tomatoes. She'd slice them thick, dip them in buttermilk, dredge in a mix of cornmeal and flour, and fry them up crisp in bacon grease. The outside crackled, the inside stayed tender, and the whole house smelled like the South on a plate. Served with a dollop of Duke's mayo or just a sprinkle of salt, they were crunchy, tangy, and downright addictive. Even the tomato haters caved. Biscuits and gravy. Fluffy buttermilk biscuits, split, stacked, and drowned in creamy sausage gravy so thick it didn't dare drip. Grandma made her biscuits by feel. No recipe, just a bowl full of white lily flour and a hand that knew when the dough was right. The gravy started with sausage crumbles in a skillet, flour for thickening, and milk stirred in until it looked like breakfast heaven. She'd serve it on a mismatched plate with strong black coffee and a look that said, "You better eat before it gets cold." And you always did. Grits. Whether you liked them plain, cheesy, or with a lake of butter in the middle, grits were the Southern morning default. Grandma never used those instant packets. Hers came from the big bag that lived in the freezer. She stirred them low and slow on the stove, using a wooden spoon and a warning not to touch the pot. Salted just right and topped with a knob of margarine or a sprinkle of hoop cheese, they stuck to your ribs and made you forget about cold cereal altogether. Cheese potatoes. Not to be confused with funeral potatoes, Grandma's cheese potatoes were their own delicious thing. Sliced russets layered with onions, thick shreds of cheddar or Velveeta, a splash of pet milk, and just enough butter to make you question your life choices. Baked in a glass casserole dish until bubbling and golden on top, they were rich, gooey, and crisp around the edges. The best part, if you got to the table early. She didn't call them au gratin or scalloped. They were just cheese potatoes. And they were always gone by the time you thought about seconds. Lime and cottage cheese salad. This was the wobbly green jewel of every Southern potluck table, sitting proudly next to the baked beans and banana pudding. Lime jello, crushed pineapple, cottage cheese, and chopped pecans, folded together into a mold that looked like it belonged in Better Homes and Gardens, circa 1963. Grandma served it cold on a lettuce leaf, like it was fine dining. Some folks loved it. Others tolerated it. But you always took a scoop because it was tradition and because she was watching. Fried catfish. There was a ritual to it. Soak the fillets in buttermilk, dredge in seasoned cornmeal, and drop into hot peanut oil until they floated and browned just right. Grandma didn't use a timer. She listened for the pop and sizzle. The result was golden, flaky fish with a crunch loud enough to hear from the porch. Served with hush puppies, coleslaw, and a slice of onion on the side, it was Friday night food done right. And yes, you ate it with your hands. That's what napkins were for. Salsify fritters. Now this was country cooking at its finest and weirdest. Salsify, also called oyster plant, was peeled, boiled, mashed, and mixed with egg and flour into fritters that were pan-fried until crisp. The taste? Somewhere between earthy and sweet, like a cross between parsnip and potato, with just enough oddness to make you suspicious. Grandma grew it in the garden, just to keep the old ways alive. And you would try a bite, because she said so. And wouldn't you know, It always grew on you. Hush puppies. These weren't just a side, they were a statement. Grandma's hush puppies were golden brown, crispy on the outside, soft in the middle, and full of chopped onion and cornmeal sass. Legend says they got their name from being tossed to barking dogs to hush them up. But in our house, the only thing they silenced was the room when the platter hit the table. Fried in hot oil next to the catfish, or by themselves with a dollop of butter, they were little bites of fried glory. And if you touched the last one without asking, you were asking for trouble. Funeral potatoes. Don't let the name fool you. These cheesy hash brown casseroles could bring the living and the grieving back to life. Grandma made them for every potluck, homecoming, and post-funeral meal in town. Frozen hash browns, sour cream, cream of chicken soup, and a whole bag of shredded cheese topped with a generous layer of crushed cornflakes swimming in melted butter. Baked until bubbly and golden, they were hot, hearty, and the first thing to disappear every single time. You didn't need a tragedy to eat them, but they sure softened the blow. Hummingbird cake. If you ever saw this towering beauty on the table, you knew someone had pulled out all the stops. Grandma's hummingbird cake was 3 layers of banana, crushed pineapple, and chopped pecans, all slathered in rich cream cheese frosting so thick it could hold a spoon upright. It was sweet, tropical, and southern as a screened porch in July. Usually saved for Easter, weddings, or whenever she felt like showing off, it was dense enough to be a meal on its own, and special enough to make the preacher ask for seconds. Chicken and sausage gumbo. Gumbo wasn't just a recipe, it was a ritual. Grandma would start with a dark roux, the kind you stir for so long your arm gets tired and your patience gets tested. She'd add onions, bell pepper, celery, the Holy Trinity, then smoked sausage, chicken, okra, and whatever else needed using up. It simmered low and slow, filling the house with a smell that made you hungry an hour before it was done. Served over rice with a shake of hot sauce and maybe a hunk of cornbread. It was messy, spicy, and worth every spoonful. Biscuits with chocolate gravy. Now this was breakfast for kids who didn't care about nutrition, just joy. Grandma would whip up cocoa powder, sugar, milk, and a little flour into a glossy, thick gravy, then pour it over hot, fluffy biscuits like it was the most normal thing in the world. It was like dessert for breakfast, and if you ever had it once, you never forgot it. Some kids got cereal. We got chocolate sauce on carbs, and a smile from Grandma that said, "Go on now, have another." Angel biscuits. Somewhere between a roll and a biscuit, Angel biscuits were soft, fluffy, and had a touch of sweetness that made them float off the plate if you weren't watching. Grandma made hers with buttermilk, yeast, and shortening, always Crisco, and let them rise just enough to puff up like a little miracle. She'd bake them in a cast iron pan, sides touching, so they'd come out golden on top and pillowy inside. Served with jam, ham, or nothing at all. They were the kind of bread you ate 3 of without thinking, and only stopped because someone gave you that look. Southern fried oysters. You knew Grandma meant business when she came home with a sack of fresh oysters and a twinkle in her eye. She'd bread them lightly in cornmeal and flour, season with salt and a dash of cayenne, then fry them until crisp and golden. The outside had crunch, the inside stayed tender, and they tasted like the ocean took a detour through the South. Served with saltines, lemon wedges, and hot sauce, or just straight from the skillet with a paper towel napkin. They were bold, briny, and not for the faint of heart. Red-eye gravy and ham. This wasn't a gravy you poured, it was a gravy you sopped. Made by frying up salty country ham, then deglazing the skillet with hot black coffee. Red-eye gravy was dark, rich, and just strong enough to make your eyelids twitch. Grandma would ladle it over grits, eggs, or a big old biscuit, and you'd chase it down with whatever was left in the percolator. It wasn't pretty, but it was powerful. One sip, and you'd be wide-eyed and halfway out the door before your second bite. There you have it. These weren't just recipes. They were stories told in cast iron, passed down through coffee-stained index cards, and remembered by the way your kitchen smelled at 5 o'clock. Your southern grandma didn't need cookbooks or measuring cups. She cooked by feel, by memory, and by the rhythm of a life that didn't waste a thing. Some of these dishes filled a table when money was tight. Others marked special occasions that only came around once a year. But all of them came from a place of love and left a mark that still lingers in our hearts and maybe our cholesterol. So whether you've made these dishes yourself or just remember the way they used to taste, I hope this video brought back a little bit of home for you. And if you're lucky enough to still have Grandma's recipes tucked in a drawer somewhere, dust them off, make something from scratch, and pass it along. That's how we keep the good stuff alive.